I'm here with Professor Sharon Goldfeld from Murdoch Children's Research Institute. We've had a fantastic day. Sharon's been looking at all the stuff we're doing here in Logan and giving us some great advice about things we can think of into the future, and also about what's happening around the country. Sharon, child development, the agenda in Australia, where do you think we're at?
So generally, I think there's a real acceptance that we have unequal outcomes for children in regard to child development, and we know from the Australian Early Development Census, by the time kids hit school, we're certainly seeing inequality. So I think there's a real movement to saying, hey, we need to be doing much more in the first 1,000 days, first 2,000 days. The question still on the table is what, and what's the kind of equity lens we want to bring to that, so we're bringing the very best of everything to those families who most need it, because that's probably going to make the biggest difference.
So you've had a bit of a look at what we're doing here in Logan. A couple of things you think we could be thinking about or focusing on?
So Logan's a really exciting area, and I think kind of at the forefront of being sort of nimble enough to be able to respond to some of the things that are going on. Some of the things we talked about was how do you actually make more, I guess, of what we already have. So kind of a multi-million-dollar infrastructure around health, education, social services that exist, probably inequitable, probably not of great quality, and probably the right people don't come. So how do we focus on the amount, the quality, and the participation rates, so that we know that, hey, what we're delivering is really going to be fabulous, given that we're already delivering it anyway.
And we're struggling with some things here in Logan to make some of the changes that we want to see, because they're big changes and they're hard to do. Who's in front of us, do you think, around the country or around the world that we could be taking notice of?
So I think there are some really great pockets of excellence. So certainly the work that's down in Doveton as a kind of pocket of excellence is definitely worth having a look at. I think there's some great early childhood education and care centres around the country that are doing some excellent work. I think there's some excellent general infrastructure. So I think Victoria delivers an excellent maternal child health service that's worth looking at. And then around the world, I think some of the work that's going on in the UK with the big lottery, and the way they're very cleverly, I think, integrating researchers, community providers, and the community in thinking about how to both deliver and evolve what they're doing in kind of real time are places to look.
The UK is a bit more analogous to Australia than some other places, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Sharon, it's been a great day. And
thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for coming. We might open the proceedings today by acknowledging the Yugambeh and Yagara people, who are the custodians of the Logan region. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Sharon Goldfeld to Logan once again. Sharon's been here numerous times, most recently at our terrific get-together event at the Logan Entertainment Centre last October, which was a wonderful day, and Sharon was the keynote there. Sharon's was the Deputy Director at the Centre for Community Child Health at Murdoch Children's Research Institute. Really one of the leading think tanks around childhood development and childhood wellbeing in Australia. And Sharon's one of the leading exponents of some really important thinking, research and practice at the systems level about how do we create environments and community systems to grow kids up well. Sharon's a paediatrician. She still is a practicing medico, but also researches and advises internationally on growing kids up well. We've got her here today. We've had a fantastic morning with Sharon, just with our the Logan Together team, talking about issues about where the Logan Together movement's up to. We've got this public seminar, and then this afternoon we've got a couple of key partners coming together, and we're going to look at specific areas of practice and projects that we're doing and get Sharon's advice on how we're going. So Sharon's going to talk to us for about an hour. We've then got light refreshments afterwards. So if you want to know more about Logan Together, connect with one of the Logan Together team, or grab Sharon, or have a chat with each other. So welcome, thanks so much for coming, and please welcome Sharon Goldfeld.
I too would like to acknowledge, I think it's the Yugambeh people of in this area, and recognise the land on which we're standing, and to acknowledge elders past, present and leaders that are emerging, and to also acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here in the room today. I'd like to also start by managing your expectations. So it was quite the description of me in the fly that went along there. So we'll see if I can meet those expectations. All critical feedback, of course, welcomed, but let me have a cup of tea or something first afterwards before you do it. So we've got about an hour together, and I thought what I would do is I'd revisit some of the things I talked about last time I was here with you, but I didn't want to do the same because I recognise some of you may be the same people. It's a bit boring to hear the same thing again. But I also wanted to share with you and go for a little bit of a deep dive in some of the projects we've been doing that have been my babies, some of which have grown up, and I want to share some of the results with you, and just to give you a sense of some of the work that we do and some of the thinking we've been doing in addressing this issue of how do we make a difference to inequities in child development and in children. Use the right button. So I always like to start my talks with this quote. It's getting a bit old now in terms of when it was put out, but we recognise the authors, some of you, Fiona Stanley, Sue Richardson and Margot Pryor. And the reason I put it out is just, it's kind of this kind of call to action, sort of a thinking pretty much I'm sure everybody in the room would agree with, which is a society that is good to children. And it's a society, it's not a service, it's not anything else, it's a society. So it's really putting the onus back on all of us, right? A society that is good to children is one with the smallest possible inequalities for children, with the vast majority of them having the same opportunities from birth for health, education, inclusion and participation. And we don't have that now in Australia, even though we should. So that's really what I'm going to talk about. And just a kind of stark reminder from James Heckman, he's a Nobel Prize-winning economist who's on our side in early childhood. And he just reminds us that once, and it sounds a bit awful, but it is the reality, that once a child falls behind, he or she is likely to remain behind. Impoverished early environments are powerful, and this is impoverished early environments, not impoverished people. Impoverished early environments are powerful predictors of adult failure on a number of social and economic dimensions. So we are growing the next generation right now. And how we do that, well, that will be interesting, won't it? So, as Matthew mentioned, I'm a paediatrician. So I spend a lot of my time, and many of you will be practitioners here in the room, and we spend a lot of time with an N of 1. And an N of 1, I don't want to sort of suggest that an N of 1 is not important, because it brings me great satisfaction if I can make a difference to an N of 1. So I think the N of 1 and the ability to have a one-on-one relationship with someone is really, really important. And for many of you, you'll realise that those relationships and relational practice is actually at the fundamental core of delivering a good service. So I don't want to sort of suggest that that's not important. But to make a difference at a population level, to make a difference to all those kids, we need to think differently, because these are the sorts of numbers that we're talking about, the numbers of children and young people with mental health problems. You'll realise, any of you who are providing the service will know this. Obesity, child abuse, developmental vulnerability in the ADC, so learning difficulties, ADHD, etc., etc. These are these kind of complex, mucky, socially determined, they call them the wicked problems. These are the problems that are abounding for our children, and the numbers are stark. And so whilst the N of 1 is really important, what we really want to understand is the N of many, which I'll talk about in a moment. This is also some work that was done using the longitudinal study of Australia's children, just looking at these ongoing psychosocial health problems. So this was everything from having cancer right through to learning difficulties, asthma, obesity, mental health problems, sleep problems. And as you can see, more than 60% of children by the time they're 7 and more than 70% of children by the time they're 8 have at least one of these problems. So that's what I said, we're in this kind of mucky world now where these are kind of psychosocial, mental health type problems, physical problems which are more like obesity. So those sorts of issues are really pervasive. These are massive numbers. So really the question for us is not so much the N of 1, although that still needs to be front of mind. The question is really, how can we keep populations of children healthy and developing well? And I put that up there as a challenge, and at the end of today you're not going to go, I've got the answer now. Thanks, Sharon. I'm going to put some things on the table that I think take us on the way there, but we're in a complex and messy space, and we're not going to have linear answers, but we're going to have answers where we put things together in different sorts of ways. So let's start with what we know, because obviously it's not ground zero. This is the work that we did on the first 1,000 days. You'll have heard a lot about the first 1,000 days. If you're in New South Wales, you'll be hearing about the first 2,000 days. The Commonwealth will talk about the first 2,000 days. Personally, I don't think it really matters, but it's definitely kind of the 0 to 8 space is the space to be in. I quite like the older age group because I think it takes kids into school, and I don't think we want to suggest that, you know, getting to school and it's all over. So it puts a bit of onus onto our education colleagues. So lots of literature now that would suggest that those first 8, 5, 3 years make a difference to the adults the children will become. And so I think it focuses the mind a little and focuses the effort a little, that says, what can we do in that space that's likely to make a difference? And these are just, I don't think I've got a little thing I'm doing. Oh, there we go. Where they say that? There it is. So these are some data also from the longitudinal study of Australia's children. I've shown these before, but I think because they're Australian, they're really powerful. So social emotional difficulties, communication, emergent literacy, vocabulary, these are social gradients. In other words, the problems get worse as you go up. And you can see the problems get worse as you go up, the problems get worse as you go up, and they start young. So what we know is inequalities in outcomes start young and continue. And the problem is catching up is really, really hard. And Clyde Hertzman, who sadly has passed away, talks about this biological embedding of environmental events. So I want to talk to you about this idea of adversity and the adversity of people's circumstances. And we had a really good conversation this morning. Part of the conversation was this idea of vulnerability and calling people vulnerable. What's really interesting in the policy world, that's used quite a lot, but actually, it won't surprise you, people don't like to be called vulnerable. So we've been trying to move the dialogue into talking about adversity, and adversity in terms of circumstance, because you can change circumstances. It's not about who you are, it's about the circumstances you're living in. But what we know is that adversity gets under the skin, and it gets under the skin in all sorts of ways. It gets under the skin in social and emotional ways, but it gets under the skin in physical ways. So we know many of the chronic disease predictors, and you'll know that you've heard about the kind of chronic disease tsunami we're having. It all starts in early childhood. I'm quite taken with this picture now, I've been using it here. But this is this idea that actually we're seeing this kind of, not only, we talk about multi-generational poverty, but we're seeing this kind of multi-generational genetic inheritance. And the question is, how do you kind of disrupt some of those things? And that can only be done if we think about pregnancy and what are we doing in pregnancy. So starting not at 0 as in birth, but starting in the antenatal period and ensuring that we give the best antenatal care and support we can. And then it does translate into real things like the brain. So this is a very lovely study. What now we can do lots of brain scans because it's much cheaper. So this is looking at the green is high SES, the red is middle, and the blue is low SES. This is total grey matter. Go with more grey matter is a good thing. And you can see already that there's a difference by the time children get to about 3 of their amount of grey matter. So this is not an easy catch-up stuff. Once your grey matter is set down, it's hard to get catch-up. So we can already see that by the time kids get to 3, their social circumstances, this is not genetic variation, this is social circumstances predicting the size of children's grey matter. So it's pretty serious stuff, yeah? And then complementing all of that, it's like a depressing bit, we'll get to the good bit. Complementing all of that is the work that's been done on this idea of adverse childhood experiences or adverse childhood events. We'll be hearing a lot about it, and if you haven't already, people talk about it a lot, but essentially it's saying there's a bunch of things that really influence children, these adverse childhood experiences that lead to impairment, that lead to adverse health behaviours, that lead to basically early death. And what they've shown is these adverse experiences, things like everything from divorce through to child abuse, actually leads. The more of those you have, the worse your outcomes and the earlier your death. And this is kind of driving people to say, hey, we should actually understand the circumstances of people's lives. We should understand the circumstances of children's lives, and we should think about what we might be able to do about that when children are young. And this is the final adversity slide, because this is the work that Martha Farah did. Some very nice work actually looking at brains and the areas of the brain that differentially get impacted by this disadvantage. And it's the areas of the brain responsible for language and responsible for executive function, two things that you need to do well at school. And so it's a kind of, what she talks about is socioeconomic status affecting the brain and then how you do. And this is what we're interested in. We're interested in the green box. We're interested in what are the factors that mediate, that disrupt the relationship between socioeconomic status and outcomes. So what can we actually do? And in the green box, she's put in things that she's hypothesised for things that we might be able to do. And that's really the question we're going to ask ourselves, what can we do? So there's a link between adversity and inequities that I just kind of want to out and remind us, because very much I'm going to be talking about today, which is inequities. I'm going to tell you what my definition is, well actually what the definition is. But just to remind us, this is equality. So in Australia there's a really strong narrative about everybody getting a fair go and everyone getting the same. But as you can see, when everybody gets the same, actually what you get is unequal outcomes. And in fact, what we know is if you deliver universal services, for example, without an eye on equity, you get differential uptake by the middle class. So what you do is you get increasing inequalities, even though you might be trying to give everybody the same. Actually giving everybody the same leads to unequal outcomes. This is equity. Equity value is recognising differential need. In other words, everybody needs different things, and if we don't think about that, then in fact we'll end up in trouble. But if we do, this is the sort of stuff we can get, which is equal outcomes. This is reality. This is kind of where we are. And if you don't believe me, let me show you some statistics. 18.4% is the proportion of children developmentally vulnerable on two or more. So that's pretty bad if you're bad on two or more domains of the AEDC, which I'm sure you all know about, the Australian Early Development Census. So that's on either physical, social, emotional, language or communication. So in the poorest areas in this country, right now, this is 2015 data, 18.4% of children are developmentally vulnerable compared to the richest areas, or richer areas, which is 6.7. So it's the bottom 20% versus the top 20%. So that's a threefold difference right here, right now in this country. So that is inequity at play. So the question is, with these statistics, how do we address inequities? So I want to put this definition up because I think it's important that we realise what inequality is, which is a difference, and inequity, which is preventable. So it's this process of systematic, and this next bit, potentially remediable differences among population groups defined socially, economically, or geographically. And the important bit there is the potentially remediable. In other words, we can do something about it. They should not be present. This is a social justice issue. And that's what today is going to be about. So let me start about this idea of service inequities. So what is it about the services we provide that can make a difference to child health and development? So just a little bit to show you some of these service inequities in play. This is plotting. This first one is looking at speech pathologists, private in blue, public in green, and our early childhood intervention services. This is Melbourne in purple. And this is the map of Melbourne, and let's just go, red is poor, this is CEFA, so red is poor, blue is rich. Now, I reckon even from the back of the room, you can probably work out that most of the speech pathologists are not in any of the areas that are poor. So they're mostly in the rich areas, right? So you can see that, like, you know, pretty much obviously. So this is looking at sort of poor versus rich. Now we can have a look at it at the AEDC results. So this is looking at children with language problems, and red is more problems, blue is less problems. And once again, you can see in the areas of red or yellow, not many speech pathologists, they're pretty much all still in the same area that doesn't have the problems. So this is inequitable service distribution. So the services, not that we don't have the services, there's plenty of them. They're just not in the areas that we really need them. So that's the first thing, service distribution. The second thing is service access. This is a very nice paper now. It's actually not in press anymore. It's now out in Social Science and Medicine, looking at use of Medicare services. So very interesting. So this is looking at the lowest income quintile to the highest income. So let's look at GP use. Now, you would look at this and go, wow, look at that, across all quintiles, everybody's pretty much using the same, right? Except that we know that children who live in poor areas, actually, as I've shown you, have a higher morbidity load, more problems. So actually, this is still, it might look all nice and rosy, and if I was a politician, I would tell you it was, but in fact it's not, because we should be seeing higher in the lower areas, and we're not. But just to make matters worse, let's look at the specialists, which are paediatricians essentially, because these are for children. And what you can see is the obvious thing there, which is lower access in lower income, higher access in higher income. So this is equity really at play, because specialists are there to see the children with the greatest need, the greatest problems. So if you've got a problem and you need to see a paediatrician, I don't know what it's like in Queensland, but in Victoria, you're really pretty much limited to sitting on a very long wait list for a few public hospital clinics or paying. There's not much in between. Or hoping to goodness some paediatrician out there will bulk bill you. So the question on the table is, these are quality services for children not being delivered to the very children who need it most. That is inequity. And then of course it leads to unequal outcomes. And then finally, this is just a reminder to us about the issue of quality. This is early childhood education and care, and we're looking at the top line. Oh, there we are. The blue is the lowest SES, the green is the highest SES, and this is developmental vulnerability, so you want to be at the bottom. And this is attending preschool and didn't attend preschool. So we have to make some assumptions that preschool is a good thing and quality, but what you can see is if you didn't attend preschool, no matter whether you were rich or poor, you still have poorer outcomes. If you attended preschool, you have better outcomes. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, right? But what you can see is even if you attended preschool, it doesn't close the gap. So attending preschool per se doesn't close the gap. Why? Well, number one, it's probably can't be responsible on its own for closing gaps. Number two, we don't know anything about dose, so how much did those kids get? And we don't know anything about quality, really. And it won't surprise you, and I'll show you some data soon, it won't surprise you to know that children living in the poorer areas of this country don't get the highest quality early childhood education and care. And that's called the inverse care law. And geographic inequities, what is it about where you live that makes a difference to child health and development? You might recognise this little area here. This is Logan. This is looking at CFA, and what you can see already in Logan, people kind of go Logan like it's one area. It's got two syllables, Logan. But actually it's a very heterogeneous area, as you well know. And these are the percentage of children who attended preschool. These are just straight off the ADC results. So in 2015 still, basically the way these maps work is dark is bad, light is good. And you can see there's still low percentages in the many areas of Logan. But much more heterogeneity than perhaps you would think on developmental vulnerability. And I think that's important to remember what's going on, it's going well. And this is developmentally vulnerable on each of the different areas. And what you can see is different things, areas light up at different times, yeah? So some signals there that some good things are going on in some areas of Logan. What's that all about, really? And I don't know the answer to that, you guys probably know more than me. But just simply that geographic inequities exist, even in disadvantaged areas. Okay, so our driver has been how do you use data and evidence to understand and address health and developmental inequities? And this kind of approach, I think it really comes from my experience in government and the importance of data and evidence in moving us beyond the rhetoric and to moving us beyond, I was talking about this morning, this idea of kind of baubilitis. So politicians in particular love baubles, which are kind of shiny, bright things, and people put on their Christmas trees, I guess, but they're shiny, bright things and they're very announceable. The problem with that is they're often not sustainable. And so the question I think we've tried to pose to ourselves is what are the things we can do that are sustainable, that allows us to really make a difference to kids. And we've also been taken with this idea of precision policy making. So we also know that policymakers kind of spray funding, and we've been thinking about how do we actually get precision policy. So how do we target policy and effort to reduce inequities so that we can keep children healthy and also better spend the public dollar. I think that is part of our responsibility, is to think about how do you get less waste in the system, because there actually is a lot of waste in the system, but also what's our responsibility in handing the decision makers better tools for making decisions, because those decisions are going to be made whether we give them the tools or not, I can assure you. So in doing that, I want to share with, these are my babies that I'm sharing with you now. My real babies are actually grown up, but these are my babies that are growing up. And I want to share them with you today and do a little bit of a deep dive in the time we've got together. So the first is a project we've got called Changing Children's Chances. And the idea behind that is really trying to move us down this pathway of how do we use data to actually help us understand disadvantage, and then actually help us understand how we might do that precision stuff, give politicians and policymakers some of that precision just using data. We're really worried about having to go out there and collect new data all the time. It's problematic. So how do you use the data we already have? And we've been very idea of disrupting this idea of disadvantage and moving it out of just being socioeconomic. So we've, and these are all our partners, so one of the really important things for us is to work with a whole range of partners, both government and non-government, and different walks of life. And so we've come up with this idea of this social determinants perspective, and you won't be able to read the detail, apologies, it's a bit small, but looking at what is it about where you live that might be about disadvantage, what is it about the other risk factors like parenting style or access to healthcare, health conditions, what about if you're actually sick, you've got caries, everything from caries through to asthma, through to cancer, and socio-demographic is in there as well. So in other words, disadvantage isn't just about that one piece of the wedge, but it's all those pieces together. And when you do that, you get a much richer picture. It's not just about saying, oh my God, almost everybody's disadvantaged. What it's trying to do is say, here are the things that you could change that would actually start to eliminate disadvantage. And this is the work we've done to say, this is what would happen if you could eliminate disadvantage. So this is, we haven't been talking about this. Should we say this is what you could do if you could get everybody to the middle? And we just thought, well, that's not aiming very high, really. So we just said, what about, this is what you could do if you got everybody to the top. In fact, you gave everybody the same level of advantage. And this is what you would actually do in terms of eliminating. So 59% decrease in social emotional problems, 49% decrease in physical functioning problems, and a 55% decrease in learning problems. So if you could eliminate disadvantage, this is the benefit you would see to the children and therefore the society. So we don't want to pretend that disadvantage is not important, because it really is, and it can really make a huge impact. These are massive impacts on society. So that's the first bit of the story. It's not like let's throw our hands up in despair because there's nothing we can do. There are things we can do, and it's a really, really big thing that you can change. Then the second thing is about addressing. I showed this last year, and it still remains our kind of idea of how do you get this kind of data-driven and evidence-based approach to system reform and system change. And this idea of innovation, so how do you use improvement for change, what I'm going to talk about today, and implementation. And more and more our thinking is better use of the existing systems. That's really our narrative. And this is often what people think about when they think about system change, right? It's not me. So I don't want to suggest that we're all going to hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and become a system tomorrow, because that just ain't going to happen. But the question is, what could we put in place that might start to move the dial a bit? And I'm very, very keen on trying to be disruptive in this space, because if you're not disruptive, it's very hard to change the status quo. So let's start with this first area, which is indicators to drive change. And I want to share with you the Kids and Community Study, because this is my baby that's grown up. So we've just been tweeting, if you're on the Twitter and you're on our Twitter, the final report that's actually out, and we've just delivered to Logan. We actually did in a few communities, and part of Logan was part of these communities that we did, so we've delivered them the report. But it really came out of this work that said, what is it about where you live that makes a difference to child development? Can we measure it, and can we change it? And it moved us away from everything on the ground to saying it's more about this whole idea about where you live. Sorry, if you want to really, if you want to do a project as difficult as possible, you have this many partners, and you do it through the Australian Research Council, which means you have more paperwork than you possibly thought you could deal with. But the beauty of this is, and this goes to show you, I always talk about collaboration being a series of first dates, but this is what we need to be thinking about. We need to all get in bed with different people, wear condoms, I guess, but we need to be getting into bed with different people, because what we know, we only know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. And so I think it's really important for us to get together with what I call the unusual suspects, really test our thinking, be prepared to be disruptive, be prepared to move beyond the status quo, and be prepared to do that in a way that makes us terribly uncomfortable. Because moving out of our comfort zone is terribly uncomfortable when we start. So these people are all trying to make us all feel terribly uncomfortable, but in trying to think in sort of different ways. But we all have the same values, I have to say. So we used the Australian Early Development Census, which we've talked about, and we were very keen in understanding why neighbouring suburbs that were kind of the same had different outcomes. And we thought that was kind of the jewel in the crown for what we're looking at. Neighbouring disadvantaged suburbs, one doing better than the other. And trying to get a framework, I guess, that helped us understand that. And so this is what we called off-diagonal communities. So we knew there'd be these communities that were rich doing well, which is on diagonal advantaged, or there'd be poor communities doing badly. But we were really interested in these guys, the off-diagonal positive. So these are poor areas doing well. We think they're the real jewel in the crown. And then rich areas doing badly. And we were interested in that kind of off-diagonal differentiating stuff. That's what we're really interested in. And so this is what it would look like in one area where you'd have, remember, dark is bad and light is good. So, but two areas with very similar SES. So it's two disadvantaged areas, one good, doing well, one doing badly. They were the kind of core areas we were interested in. And then we wanted to sort of challenge ourselves and think about what are the things we should think about. How do we think about community as more than just services? And it's hard to do that, isn't it? Because you often think just about the services. And as you can see, that is one of the domains. But we also wanted to think about the built environment, the way we structure our communities with the buildings, particularly in urban areas and large regional areas. It doesn't quite hold for rural areas, but the parks, the buildings, the number of public housing, how tall that public housing, how concentrated that public housing, how far is it to get to places, what's the transport like, what are the roads like, those sorts of things sit in the physical environment. The social domain, how does the community work together? Do people like each other? Do people even like kids? Is there a lot of disruption? And there's some interesting findings in this area. Governance, what about citizen engagement? How does the governance, big G governance work in that area? But what about small G governance? Do people feel like they're part of something? Do they feel like they're change agents? Do they actually participate as citizens? And this is not just about parents, it's about the community as a whole. And then socioeconomics, as everything you would expect, all the socio-demographics that you would expect them to go in there. So we came up with a whole lot of measures, and we went out to 25 local areas in Australia. This is, I don't know if you appreciate research, but this is how you can make it as hard as possible. So we went in all these different states. We have investigators. So Jeff Walcott, who's not here, might come this afternoon, is one of our investigators for Queensland. And so we went in, so we wanted to sort of test this in different jurisdictions. And we used quantitative data. So we went out and got census data, local data, all sorts of numbers, sort of fun data that we could. And we also got qualitative data. An enormous amount of quality. If any of you want to do a PhD and use qualitative data, I can promise you we have more qualitative data than we could possibly know what to do with. We have actually coded all of it. So it's there for the picking. 136 interviews and 50 focus groups across the eastern seaboard. So an enormous amount of information, and I'm going to tell you a story about how we ended up using that. And we also did policy analysis. across on all the local policy documents. So we started with this idea of these differentiating factors, as I told you, like 2 disadvantaged areas, one doing well, not doing well, what differentiated them. And we're looking for this idea, I won't go into the detail of the triangulation, but we had 8 areas. So we were looking for issues that across the quantitative data, more than 4 communities were telling us the same thing. And they were telling us the same thing when we had a quant and qual that kind of matched. And that's how we came up with the factor that we thought was the best bet. Then we had all this qualitative data, like an enormous amount of qualitative data. We said, we don't want to throw that away. And so we talked about this idea of what they thought was important for child development in their area. And if you had the opportunity to ask all of those people those sorts of questions, we figure that's probably important. And so we used it as a massive qualitative study to come up with what were the things people would tell us they thought was important. Because in the end, when you're going out to your communities, you're going to want to know what people thought was important. And so we had to make sense of all of that. And so we pulled it together into this idea of foundational community factors. Factors that lay the foundations for a good community for young children. And that report's out publicly now. And the reason we've called them foundational community factors is because we think that these kind of give us some of the building blocks for everything else that goes on top. And I have to tell you, these are not easy things. So what I'm about to show you is not something you're going to change tomorrow, but they're starting us on that pathway of being disruptive and having a bit more of a long-term lens. So these are the differentiating ones. These are the ones, remember, that told us something about differentiating communities doing badly and well, both poor. And there's some very interesting little ones, little gems in here. Things like gentrification. So what was really, remember, these are poor areas. But what we found was, in 2 poor areas, in 1 poor area, there was still more of a mix of income. So what happened was you got this residualising of communities. So 1 local area, 2 suburbs next to each other. People moving into this other suburb had a better school. People moved into this, you got residualising of the other. So it was really interesting. Both poor, they're not, the lowest quintile. They're not, these are not, oh, this one got rich. It wasn't gentrification as in the rich people moving in, it was just the less poor. So it's really interesting, like, is gentrification then a good thing or a bad thing? It's just really interesting stuff that challenges us, because actually probably income mix in an area is an important thing, but not income mix, really rich people living in really poor people. That is not good, but income mix is probably important. This other one here, stigma. Where is it here? Stigma. So this was really interesting. So there was 2 communities and everybody knew who the bad community was. In that bad community, they had an enormous amount of social capital. So the bad community had basically bonded, right? They had great bonding social capital, terrible, they didn't look outside. So they kind of closed it in and went, we're the terrible people. And people go, that's the people, And so what was interesting is kids were doing badly, even though they had high levels of social capital, it was actually bonding social capital, not bridging social capital. We go out and meet other people and talk to other people. So, and there's not very much written about this idea of stigma and how people feel about themselves and how people feel about how other people talk about them. So I think some really interesting things about how you kind of disrupt some of those social mores. Things like housing density, so more high-rises are associated with poorer outcomes for kids. Public housing, proportion of public renters, more public renters, kids were doing badly. So these, no one is suggesting, so next week can you go out there and completely rearrange the entire public housing in your area? But long-term lens, what's the kind of design elements, the planning elements, because remember, people are planning communities all the time. So those, I'll let you look at some of those, I'm going to go through each one of them. These are the ones that told us, gave us some directionality, yeah? They're not like hold your hand on your heart stuff, but they're giving us directionality. And then there were these really interesting, important ones. So things like cost of early childhood education and care services came up. These are things that came up time and time. We did 16 local communities. This is more than 8 of them. So these are consistent findings. These are not 1 or 2 people. These are consistent findings. Cost of early childhood education and care, service coordination, access to affordable and secure housing, having good quality parks, being away from traffic. So these are what, you don't have to reinvent. And if, I'm sure, I'm not telling you things you go, wow, our community wouldn't say that at all. Walkability, being close to nature and greenery, ability to have a say, presence or absence of public transport. So, and these are things that hook straight into to-do lists. Straight into to-do, not easy to-do lists. Not like I'm going shopping tomorrow to-do list, but these are to-do lists. These are things that clearly people are saying are important for us. And clearly really concrete ways of delivering on community expectations and delivering on things that are important for child development. And here's an example of just putting those all together. So if you spoke to someone in council, they'd say, oh, there's everything here. There's banks, there's gyms, there's this, there's that, but if only you could get there. And this is the important factor, having a family-friendly destinations that you can actually get to. So this is the whole thing, isn't it? You can have everything, but if you can't get there, if people aren't coming, like, what's the point, right? So it's how do you connect the ideas of transport, family-friendly expectations. So it's kind of a dot joining exercise. I won't go through all this, we haven't got time, but you can see this other one, presence or absence of public. If there's no bus and we've got no transport, families won't use the service. Seems logical, doesn't it? But, Logan's a bit of an exception, but in general, people don't look at transport as an issue. There's a very nice, just a bit of a segue, this is terrible, I'm really bad at this, but there's a very nice project going on in Cincinnati where they were looking at a community and they were saying people weren't coming to antenatal care and they were having quite high, very low birth weight rates. And very low birth weight, it's crappy outcomes really for a large proportion of those kids. And they were looking at, well, what's happening? Why are people not coming to antenatal care? And they set up a whole series of things. It turned out to be transports, and then they would ring people and they would tell them what bus to get on and yada yada. Anyway, eventually, over time, they eliminated very early birth weight in this community. Like, eliminated it. Just extraordinary. And that wasn't because they provided a better service. They just worked out how to get people there. So it's just a reminder that, sometimes you've got to have a look underneath the rocks. So just to let you know, these things are all now publicly available. So there's the actual report. There's a community manual, like how do you go out and collect these data, which are available on request. We didn't put it out there because we think it's not that easy just to go out and collect things. So we wanted to have a chat to people, but the manual is available. So how to collect those differentiating factors. We can't stress enough the importance of qualitative data. The importance of going out there and actually asking people what they think is so important as part of what you're doing. And just so you know, but you'll have to ask the relevant people in the room, there is a report on Logan. It's just on a couple of suburbs in Logan, but it is on Logan if you want to see it. None of the communities are available on the web, so we've kept the actual communities out of the public websites because that's their data for them to use in the way they see. But there is going to be just a generic profile, so you can just see what a profile looks like. So KICS is done. Well, it's done mainly because my main project manager is having a baby and I've run out of money. So that's 2 good reasons. But just so you know, we are sort of changing it now to look at, we're very interested in the built environment, and so we're doing a piece of work linking our GIS measures, so all those built environment measures we developed for KICS, we've done them at a whole of country level now through some work at RMIT and linked it to the AEDC. So we're going to try and get an Australian Research Council grant to do the analysis on that, and that will tell us which elements, this is the first study ever in the whole world like this, by the way, will tell us which elements of the built environment most predict for child development, and that will tell us where we might put our effort. So I want to talk to you a little about this idea of stacking. I don't have to, I've got, what, 15 minutes maybe? Yeah? So once again, my mate Heckman, it's not actually my mate, I don't really know him, but So just this idea of what he says is, for families living in adversity, it may be that the mutual benefit of both continuity, so over time, and complementarity, so targeting at different times, of services will be necessary to promote human capital. In other words, guess what? We're out of silver bullets. There is no, like we've done sanitation, we've done immunisation, we've done hygiene, that's it, no more silver bullets. Now we're into complex, mucky, multi-layered, sort of everything interventions. And so for us, that's triggered us doing something called restacking the odds. This is one of my newer babies, it's very young. And the idea is to reduce intergenerational disadvantage in Australia. And I'm working with unusual suspects. So we're working together, SBA, Social Ventures Australia, education-based not-for-profit, and Bain International, very large international consulting group. So we're bringing different brains in there. And the idea is, what about if we could just get 5 fundamental strategies right? Not 10, not 55, we'd have a whole debate about what they should be, just 5, where we've said, can we get antenatal care, early childhood education and care, and the first 3 years of school right? Just those 3, continuity. And let's look at 2 areas that we can target ecologically, so target the parents where there's an evidence base. Sustaining nurse home visiting and parenting programs. And we ask ourselves, can we get them right according to quantity? Is there enough of them? Quality, are they any good? And participation, do the right people come? And the aim is to get this kind of heat map together, so then there can be some strategies in response. So we've started on what I can only call a journey, but some really interesting early learning. So we took the national quality standards that you'll be aware of for early childhood education and care, and we recast them, focusing just on 3 standards out of the 7 that are the most predictive of children's outcomes. And we call those our restacking the odds standards, and they're the ones that we're looking at to be exceeding on, to be an exceeding centre. So we're basically saying, yep, it's great to have the health one there, it's terrific that people wash their hands, but really that doesn't predict the children's outcomes. So, and it won't surprise you, it's about teacher quality, it's about probably the most important one is how teachers and educators work with the children. So, this is what happens when you recast it. So for Australia, you only had 30% that were exceeding anyway, drops down to 19%. And in the community we were in, it dropped down from 30% to 14%. And if I showed you the quintiles, actually the deciles, I've got another one which I'm not showing. If I showed you the deciles, guess where most of the exceeding ones were? Oh, I know you have to tell you earlier. Anyway, this is what happens when you get granular data. So we're really interested in kind of getting underneath what lies beneath in these communities. So this is our case study area where we have 1,500 3 to 5-year-olds. This is what we found. Participation. So 539 of the 790 4 to 5-year-olds attend less than 15 hours per week. So this is the blue, which is attending Logan, and then attending 15 hours is the smaller green bit. And it won't surprise you who doesn't come. So you know how we go, like 100% of children are attending? It's not true. Quality, 7 of the 23 early childhood education care centres in this area are rated exceeding using our measure. So most are not, and we were in kind of poor suburbs. Quantity, there is more than enough supply. This is not a quantity problem, with only 50% of the current capacity being used. So when you get underneath and have a look, this is kind of what's going on. That essentially we've got plenty of stuff, but just the right people don't seem to be, I'm making a huge generalisations obviously, the right people don't seem to come, and it's probably not of the right quality. And so in our little green, yellow, red world that we're trying to create, which obviously gets rid of a whole lot of noise, doesn't it, when you get down to green, yellow, red. So plenty of services, not a problem. Quality, you know, 21% exceeding, so it was like not 0, we had to be pretty generous. And red is that we really don't have the right kids coming, and that's at 4, that's our universal year, right? It's not they're coming for more than 15 hours, we've got less coming for the 15 hours they're meant to be coming. Now, these data are not easily available. We have to go into every single service and get the data. So this is percentage of children attending over enrolled. It's not the population. It actually doesn't change very much if you just do population. So these are the sorts of things we're doing across all those 5 areas, and then working with communities to give the data back in a spreadsheet that they can use and data visualisation that they can use so they can see how are we doing against the rest of this area, how are we doing against the rest of our state, the country, and how we're doing against where we ought to be if we're providing the greatest quality. And we had to do all those other ones in between, because what we found is if we just went to the quality, everybody was just red, and that's pretty demoralising. So we've had to think through how we do that, because we do want to stimulate change, and stimulate change isn't about whacking everybody over their head with a great big mallet. So I want to talk to you about this idea of bringing relational practice and using evidence-based programs that already exist, and share with you our nurse home visiting program that we've been doing called Right at Home, which was can an Australian model of sustained nurse home visiting actually work? And it's based on this idea of proportionate universalism. So we're delivering to the 5 to 10% right at the top, but we're delivering pretty much what everybody else gets, just with a different dose and intensity. So our program was delivered through standard maternal child health services. It wasn't something we did off the side with some YouTube people who grew up. It was actually the standard nurses, and we just did everything with them. And it's a collaboration between RAC, Western Sydney University, who was the implementer, and us, who are the researchers. And it's just been published in this very, very beautiful, I love the cover of this. This is Annals of the New York Academy of Science that just published an entire publication on the implementation and practice for early childhood development. So if you want to do some interesting reading of things that are happening, particularly I think in middle income countries where there's a lot of innovation, have a look at this. It's a whole issue, and we were able to be part of this issue with this very beautiful cover. So here's a, I'm an academic, we get excited about these things, but it was a really interesting thing to get published. So what's Right at Home? It's a sustained nurse home visiting program, 25 to 35 visits, structured flexibly. So the whole point is there is an actual program. So we talk about being flexibly structured and structured flexibility. So there's no point writing in and talking to a parent about something that I want to talk about. It's grounded in partnership, it's focused on building capacity, and it's embedded in the existing service system. Anything that is not embedded is very difficult to sustain. These are the risk factors we targeted, and as you can see, it's not just about being poor, it's about living alone, it's about having poor mental health, it's about not having great education, and poor health, and smoking. So there's a whole range of risk factors. 2 or more of those got you into the study. And we suggested we could improve parent care, so can you create less chaos in the home, routine bedtimes, etc., parent responsivity, and a more supportive home leading partner. And then we're doing a 3 to 5 year follow-up, but I won't focus on that. Here's the results. So it worked. Yay! Thank you. So we improved parent care around safety and regular bedtime, parent responsivity, so we improved parenting, more warmth, less hostility, and home learning environment we also improved, although not as much as we wanted. So it worked as well as any other program anywhere in the world. And what's more is it worked, but it actually delivered it to more people. So one of the big problems with these services around the world is people do not come or stay. But in our program, 84% of the women received more than 75% of the intervention. Nowhere in the world have those statistics been reached. And the reason why is because they really liked it, and they really enjoyed it, and they really got something out of it. And that tells us here, in this satisfaction, this effect size of 0.9 is enormous. And this other one here, which is the enablement index, is how women felt about themselves as adults and as parents. So it's kind of their own empowerment and enablement, and that size also, effect size, is enormous. And those questions are asked by blinded research assistants. So remember, this is intervention and control. There's a control group who get usual care and an intervention group. So these are real statistics. So nurse home visiting, when done well, works. Now I just want to talk to you about this last bit. I've got a couple of minutes about achieving impact at scale. It's something we've been thinking about a lot. And as researchers, Sometimes, you know, we get caught up in our own little, you know, world of creating great trials. But that last trial that I showed you, that was designed with implementation in mind. Because if we don't think about scale, we're dead. Dead in the water, because scale kills. Everything you can do at small scale, when you take to large scale, it kills it. In that other one, restacking, we actually went in and had a look. The service had chosen a really great evidence-based parenting program. Hardly anyone was coming, so they didn't have the right people coming, and they weren't delivering it according to the way it was designed. So that's because scale kills. Unless you have attention to implementation, scale kills. So how do we shift the outcome dial? So to do that, I just want to talk briefly about what we're doing in Victoria called Generation Victoria, or Gen V, which is essentially recruiting the entire state, read entire Logan, into a study. So consenting them into a study where we suck up all their data. No new data, all existing data. And the question is, can we then use that to speed up what we know and how we translate it? Can we reduce the burden of modern epidemics? And in other words, can we start solving some of the problems? And then can we prevent adult disease? And we're doing it at a whole of state level. We're going to try it anyway. And this is the sort of thing we're doing. We're actually looking at all the children and all the data they're already collecting. And this includes, this is what you might be interested in thinking about, includes biological data. So all the kids have blood spots, there's a whole lot of stuff all the kids have access. This is all their health service data, their hospital data, their clinical data, every bit of data they actually have, we're going to suck up. So normally with these linked data, you get a lot of data, but it's very shallow. This is trying to give depth. This is trying to create kind of what you need here, I think, but we need to do all over Queensland, which is this ability to be able to say something meaningful for children over time and to test things and be able to see whether or not they worked without actually going out there and doing new studies and doing it quickly. Because, you know, I've done a randomised controlled trial, good on me, but actually it took a long time to do. It takes a long time to get the data. It takes a long time to analyse the data. And so we've been very lucky because we've translated very quickly from a number of states, but actually it can be 7 to 10 years from the time of starting a study. Too long, too unnimble, too 20th century. So 21st century says, how do we do this in a whole different way? And how do you build the social contract? So very neat examples in the UK where they built the social contract with a city and then start to collect the data on the entire city, not just children, the entire city, and build the social contract that actually collecting the data was a good thing, that it was actually going to lead to better services, better transport, it's actually helped that community, and then sucked up all the data, everything, transport services, everything. And so with Gen V, it's the ability to be able to take, I mean, sort of the boy at the front, from the conception right through to death. I don't know if that's what death looks like, but this is the real interesting thing. It's the ability to look at different communities. There are no other data sets that allow us to do that at scale. And so it's allowing us to say, what are the data that we could use? And this is not just the data we know about, this is the data that's hidden in places, and suck all of that up. So we can say, well, here's one area, here's another area, then there's a whole of the state that becomes a control. So, and these are the areas that we're going to focus on in the first instance. So I put that up, so I'm Deputy Director of this, particularly focusing on policy, equity and translation in particular, but I put it up as a, wow, this is kind of, and it is going to be possible. We are making this happen. And this is the way of the future. We've got to move away from individual studies, individual evaluations, to a data infrastructure that's nimble and responsive. And so we're hoping by 2035, so we recognise long-term aims, solve complex issues for Victoria's children, be a model for the rest of the world, which is what we're trying to do, key influence policy behaviours, and this important last bit, be a global collaborative. So once again, we can't do this on our own, but I wanted to put it up there as the kind of final bit, which is, I've shown you a number of projects, but if I wanted to implement them at scale, what is the infrastructure one needs? What is all the bits that one needs? So you need great evidence, but you also need great data. So we end on a word of hope. Equality of outcome is possible. I put this up every single time. These are our immunisation rates, and you can see there's no difference whether you're rich or poor, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, and where you live. Why? Gosh, some interesting thing happens. First of all, a Conservative politician put up that he was going to solve our problems with immunisation. He set up a data system on every single child in this country that told us whether or not there was immunisation. He put in place the fact that we could have protocols over what immunisations we would get, and everybody thought very long and hard about the innovative systems you could put in place that would reach the children who are normally hard to reach. So in this country, you don't actually have to be jabbed by a doctor, you can be jabbed by a nurse, you can actually be jabbed by an Indigenous healthcare worker. And it's very clear about how you do it, it's very clear how to keep the immunisations cold, all of those things are really clear. And that's the sort of thinking we need to apply. So for example, so I would do the same with 5-year survival rates, which is the other outcome, because it doesn't matter if you're an Indigenous kid sitting in the middle of a rural area of Northern Territory, you will get the same protocol for your leukemia as a kid who comes from South Yarra, which is a rich area of Melbourne. Same protocol. Not all countries can say that, but in this country, same protocol. Can't say the same if you've got ADHD. Your management, if you live in South Yarra, will be fundamentally different to if you're an Aboriginal kid. And that's the inequity we still have problems with. So, I finish on this note. This is my all-time favourite poem and a very beautiful photo as well. Gabriela Mistral was a Nobel Prize winning literature laureate, and she herself never had children, believe it or not. But she writes this very beautiful poem, "Many things we need can wait, the child cannot. Now is the time his bones are being formed, his blood is being made, his mind is being developed. To him we cannot say, oh, I should go on him. To him we cannot say tomorrow. His name is today." Thank you.